Okay, welcome back. This is the next video in my series on corresponding squares, where we're going to focus a bit more on the practical application of what we've been talking about so far. In the previous video, I went through all of the sort of the basic king and pawn versus king endgames, showing how you can derive and understand where the key squares are for those types of simplified positions. So in this video, we're going to use that knowledge and look at some actual game positions. So we're going to look at 4 games today. The first 3 games we're looking at quite briefly. Just wanted to demonstrate some of the points we brought up in the last video on king and pawn endgames. And the main course, as it were, is the Gligoric-Fischer endgame from the 1959 candidates, which is often used as an example of corresponding squares in practice. So the first game we're going to look at is Weiss versus Zukertort. Just bring that game up. It's from 1882. We've met both of these players before, actually, in the blunders in the World Championship, which I've been doing. Zukertort, of course, lost to Steinitz in the first World Chess Championship match. And Weiss actually drew a 1889 tournament, came equal first with Gligoric. Neither of those players decided to put their hand up for a World Championship match, and that's when Gunsberg got his shot at the title. So Weiss is a very strong player from the late 1800s. So in this endgame, I'm going to go straight forward to move 78. And you can see this position. Weiss is white, clearly winning position. He's well in the zone for key squares, and it's just a case of carefully advancing the pawn without bungling it with knight's pawns. Remember, there are some stalemate tricks in the corner. So let's just see how this game proceeded. King g8, push the pawn to g4, king f7, push the pawn to g5, king g8, and now you want to sort of get into a better position with your king. If you push the pawn now, it would not be so good. So king to g6, king goes in the corner, which is where the stalemate tricks occur. But this is king f7 is the last move of the game, because in this particular case, because you've got your king into such an advanced position, even if, let's say, the game continued, that's the only way the game could continue, what you now do is you just simply advance the pawn. King can go either way, and then you just advance your pawn in the corner, and there's no stalemate there, right? So I just wanted to demonstrate that. Be careful, advance your king first when you're talking about knight's pawns. Okay, the second game I want to look at very briefly is this one between Amos Burn and Pillsbury. Once again, very famous players in their time, and I just wanted to quickly sort of show this. This is sort of showing a transition from a Philidor position. You can see black's Philidor position. This should be a draw, and then white eventually sort of gave up and decided that just get to this position here, trade off rooks, right? So this position is drawn. Now remember what we highlighted before. We have key squares there, and then you've got the matching corresponding squares there and there, and then you actually have matching corresponding squares, and also the f7 square is a corresponding square. So what happens now? I mean, ordinarily this game would be drawn nowadays, which is why you don't see too many of these examples in later games. But what black does is black just oscillates between f7 and f8, and there's nothing white can do about it, right? Because just hover backwards and forwards. Don't go to e8 or g8 unless the white king has already popped onto e6 or g6. So black just keeps on going backwards and forwards between those two squares. That's the way it draws. And now Burn decides to try and make progress. Now the black king pops out. Pawn advances with check, and then now we have stalemate. So I thought that sort of demonstrates one of the defensive strategies where you just oscillate backwards and forwards in front of the pawn until you have to pop out when white is threatening to go to the sort of corresponding key square. And now I just wanted to demonstrate another point with the game Botvinnik versus a Flohr. Where is it? It's here. Now I'm going to go to move 43 in this game because it's quite instructive. White has just played rook to f1 check, and king e7 and king e8 both draw. King g8 probably loses because your king gets cut off, but what black should not have done is played rook f6, because what happens here is he transitions into a losing king and pawn endgame. Obviously Flohr probably didn't think it was, but that's what's happened. Botvinnik takes the rook off, and the game continues. Just continue forwards through here. I don't go through all this. Obviously black had to sort of duck back because this white h-pawn is the distraction, so black has to go and pick up h-pawn. Meanwhile white is rushing across to the queen side to pick up both pawns, and unfortunately for black, by the time he gets there, white's on a key square. Remember we had you got the squares one in front, so they're the key squares, and white is already on a key square, and then now you have the standard sort of advance king first and then bring the pawn up, and then the game ended there. So just wanted to sort of demonstrate that from a further back position. Okay, so I covered those very quickly, and now we're going to look at, as I mentioned, is the main point of this video is talking about this famous Gligoric versus Fischer endgame. Now the relevant position is, well, I've already drawn these things up, but we'll just go back a square. We'll look at where we think the key squares and the corresponding squares are. Now, because the pawn has not advanced to the across the fifth rank, or to the fifth rank, you need to put the key squares one square in front. Right, and I think this is very similar in our analysis to what we performed last time. So if white is on e5, the main square to be on is a7. And if white is on b7, should be on b5, and the same for c5 and c7. Okay, so the main reason for that is that if white is threatening to attack a6 and b6, then you have to be able to defend that square. And then now we go back one square. We go to, what about if we go to a4? Well, then these squares are not corresponding squares, because then white would take the opposition, whichever one you were on, so that wouldn't work very well. So, I mean, of course, if you're on the key squares already, then that would probably be perfectly fine for black, but the idea is that the corresponding square is back there, right? You can confirm for yourself that, you know, other squares don't work so well. And then on this side, if you're on the C4 square, then the corresponding square is C8. I was going to say C8, but actually there's a bit of a choice here. And as you saw in the, I'll just switch back to the thumbnail, you can see that actually B8 can cover either of those situations. So I'll just put F5 in there for now, because in this game, Gligoric went to C4 first, right? So either of those two squares will cover C4, and once again, A8 or B8 will also cover A4 if the white king went that way. So that is the layout, right? So, and in the game, the move played was King C4, right? So now King C4 has been played. Black needs to be either on B8 or C8 according to analysis. Now you look at that. Well, he's on C8 and can move to B8. And if he was on B8, he could move to C8. And in fact, there's a few other, even if you're on A8 in this position, you could move across to B8 and draw the game. Now, why this is so interesting is that you might say to yourself, you know, that's Fischer played King B8 and that the game was drawn. But if at a variation, if you moved up to C7, problem with that is white will move to C5. Now white's got the opposition and you lose. So that's why you can't actually do the natural thing, moving forwards. You have to move sideways and just effectively what you're doing is you're oscillating between those two squares, and then if you know, white wanted to sort of come back around and go to that square, well then you'd be oscillating between these two squares. So I hope that's clear. I actually have another way of looking at that. Just let me bring it up. Just slide this on top. Yeah, there will do. This was the idea of trying to visualize that of sort of sets of overlapping squares. You can see in the chart here that I've outlined what I explained, corresponding square 1, 1, 4, 4, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, and 5, and this B8 square is a very useful square because it covers either of A4 or C4. And then you can see that in this visualization of the matching squares. A5 matches A7, B5, B7, C5, C7, and A4 and A4 is matched by those two, and C4 is matched by those two. So I think if you see as we go through, we'll see different situations. In this situation, because black has the extra spare square, which is very useful, then it's a drawn endgame, and in this position, and black can be on either of those B8s or C8s in this particular position, and is drawn. If, on the other hand, white has the spare square, then that's where we see the difficulties, and we'll see this in other positions where, you know, concepts such as triangulation come in, because white has a spare square and can sort of change the move and then get to normally trip black up so the black can't get to the corresponding square. I've just demonstrated how the sort of technique of corresponding square analysis can really help you in, you know, practical endgames when they're as simplified as this. So we'll continue looking at these and more complicated examples as the series continues. Hope you enjoyed that, and thank you very much for watching.